Is Dr. Patrick Lockwood coming back to you live here with my good friend Steve Horner, and we're going to talk about some very interesting things today. Steve, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a little about you?
Yes, hello everyone. My name is Stephen. I created and operate a system of classes, workshops, and one-on-one therapy around the idea of male power, agency, and excitement, which I call APEmen. And I've done 3 years of training as an expressive arts therapist, which has led me to this work to help men explore and use their bodies to connect with their emotions, but also to engage very strongly with the idea of embodied male energy.
Okay.
That would be the elevator pitch.
Right on. So it's male specifically focused, and it's about using one's body to allow affective expression.
Yes, thank you. It is male only, and that is because when I got involved in forms of expressive dance and expressive movement, improvised expressive movement, I found the environments to be about 95% female, female created, female taught, female led, and a lot of the talk that and instruction that I had focused on things that I didn't feel familiar to me, and I had experiences that weren't necessarily related to the way that the teachers or classes were being operated. And I felt very strongly that there needed to be a space for men to engage with the bodies as they experience them, rather than being told that they should feel physically sensations that are foreign to them. So, yeah, I created and adapted a system that allows men to explore their movement, their physicality on their own terms, and not to judge it or say that it's bad, but to, in a sense, enthusiastically encourage it to happen. And by that, that's kind of sounds mysterious, but for example, in the classes and workshops that I do, I encourage men through a progressive arc, which I call a kinesthetic arc, to actually, I won't say get violent. In fact, I don't encourage violence, but to express power through their physicality, which someone might interpret as aggressive or violent. But they're doing it in a context or in a manner which allows them to feel what that's like. And I've found that men, particularly through sport, for example, we could talk about sport as being an excellent example of how men naturally, I believe, need to feel these sensations in their body to access or express emotion, even if they don't know they're doing that. And so I give them the opportunity, and I manage that so that they have the opportunity to sometimes punch a piece of foam. That's the extreme. To feel what it's like to make that power with the body, to run around the room chasing each other like they might have done if they lived 500,000 years ago in a forest. To re-experience what the body has evolved through as a man, which we now tend to deal with through violence or through sport or through other forms of unaware activity.
Unaware activity. So there's like three really important things there. There's the concept of men being able to express themselves through their body. There's the specific focus on power-driven self-expression. And then there's the idea of, violence and how do we kind of deal with violence. I'd love to come back to those three things. However, before we do that, if you could just kind of give me and everyone a sense of how did we get here to this business of yours? How did you find this expressive movement therapy?
Yes, well, that's an interesting question. I found it through a natural process of going through my own psychoanalytical process. I I had some trauma as a child related to my father, which I don't need to go into that detail, but I went into therapy about 8 years ago. And I'd always loved to dance in nightclubs. And I got a lot of joy out of that.
Yeah.
And I stopped doing it for a while when I was living in England in the countryside on a farm. And when I went into therapy, I started going dancing again, and I got feedback that I was, from people I didn't even know, that I was an extraordinary dancer. I spoke about this to my therapist, and he said, well, try out some things like 5 rhythms or biodanza. Some of your viewers might be familiar with those. And what I found was that it was the first time in my life that I did anything intuitive. And this led me on a path that I realized that moving my body through space and time, with or without music, specifically without choreography. I'd like to underline that when I say the word dance, I don't mean ballet or um, rumba or anything else, but a free movement, whatever that means, letting the body speak for itself.
Okay.
I then went into a 2-year process of exploring the 10 different modalities of this idea, which is called somatic movement. And I landed on one which is based here where I live in Northern California, called the Tamalpa Life Art Process. And I studied under Anna Halprin, who's now 100 years old, but she was the first postmodern dancer. And in that case, I do mean dance. And her daughter, a psychoanalyst, psychologist, Daria Halprin, who created this institute where they map the metaphors, the movement capacities of the body. Let's say I'm holding up my arm and the arm has a certain physiological capacity to move, and how that relates to how we use our arms, and
Mm-hmm.
how that relates to the metaphor of what those movements mean, and
Uh-huh.
how we hold that meaning and our histories of ourselves in our body.
Mm.
And in going through that training process, I got certified in July as an expressive art therapist. And as I've already said, during that experience, I felt that I was having a version of the experience which was different as a man
Yeah.
to the teachers, the faculty, the founders, and the other students who were mostly female. For a year, I was the only man in the room. And I very strongly felt that instead of reproducing or experiencing what the females in the room tended to experience, I was having other experiences, and I wanted to help men. Um, I wanted to help men be validated for feeling what they're feeling, rather than being told they shouldn't do something a certain way.
Right.
And so I created this in response to that, where I've mapped the same movement capacities of the arm, but instead of saying it's solely about what has been created in this system so far,
Mm-hmm.
that a man's arm has also been to defend his family or to kill his prey to eat. And we're going back over the evolutionary history of man and women, not how necessarily we use our bodies today. But if you look at sport, particularly, the actions involved in throwing a football is the same as throwing a spear. There's a whole discussion to be had about how we, in our leisure time now, replicate a lot of the movement qualities of the way that we've used our bodies in the past, men or women.
Sure.
It's not male specific.
Sure.
But the male body has been used in a certain way that has been programmed into us over a long period of time, and we're changing that programming. But this use of force, for example, that we have become accustomed to using throughout evolution, we continue to want to use, and society continues to want to fight that we use it, which is another interesting topic.
Right. Right. I think we could talk about the need for fight and the need for play for at least a few hours if you wanted to. Yeah. So you ended up in dance because of a therapeutic experience you had.
Yes.
Okay.
Well,
So,
dance was important to me, but yes, discovering it as uh, discovering dance and movement as therapeutic came out of psychotherapy. Yes.
oh, okay, great, great. And have you done any other kind of work in your life, or have you always been interested in the therapy world?
I sat at a desk as a corporate planner in specifically in the airline business. I was a strategic planner in the airline business for 20 years, which took me through to 4 countries. Um, but yeah, I would sit, interesting talking about hands, I would sit at a computer,
Uh-huh.
type, look at a screen, and have meetings and do presentations for about 20 years. So I would be a great example of someone who did not use their body. I
Mm,
was in my head. I was in ideas. I
mm,
was in control, planning, um, etc. Yeah,
okay.
looking forward, and this again the therapeutic process, but the outcome of getting in touch with my body through movement um, has allowed me to access a different part of me,
Hmm.
and um, yeah, I'm a completely different person actually to who I was when I would sit.
Wow.
I run. I do exercise every day. I have created this movement practice for men. I volunteer 2 days a week at a school as an assistant PE teacher. So I try to build everything that I do now in relationship to my body and how it
Mm,
moves, as opposed to sitting around. And a great inspiration for that has been this woman, Anna Halpern, who I've mentioned. She is 100 years old and still teaching
mm,
um, because she's kept her body moving her entire life. And I think
wow.
there's a direct correlation between our physical capacity of our minds and our bodies if we keep our cells and our nervous system active.
Right. Yeah. And I think I don't want to speak too definitively, but it seems like the literature that I'm aware of about supercentenarians is that most of them, if you make it past 100, it's because you have a fairly well balanced and fairly active lifestyle. None of them just sit around and watch TV all day or read books all day. Most of them have been up and doing things and things like that since they were kids.
Yeah, yeah, I would agree.
Well, so I think there's something to that, and I don't know about the literature per se for this topic. However, it seems to make intuitive sense, as you mentioned earlier. And I
Mm-hmm.
think there's something to be said for the intuitive side of us as humans and how it tends to get downplayed for our intellect and
Mm-hmm.
our in our
Mm-hmm.
head capacities, not our outside of our head capacities
Yeah,
nowadays.
yeah.
And I, for one, am extremely guilty of living in my head and kind of relying on it. And I can tell, like, I'm a very different person when I work out or go for a
Mm-hmm.
run.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
I'm not, like a dramatically different personality, but there's a different psychological awareness associated with being active.
Mm.
And it just seems like that is so badly missing
Yes,
nowadays.
yes. I'm not a researcher or an academic, and so I'm absolutely terrible about noting things that I've seen or read or heard. But I do remember the facts, but I'm not always able to quote where they came from. And this is an example. I remember reading at the very early stages of this process that I went through to change that 60% of the neurons in the brain. This is something that you may know or be able to confirm as a having studied neuroscience, but 60% of the neurons in the brain are involved in movement because speech is movement, blinking eyes are movement, etc. And I dismissed that at the time. So, no, we're thinking creatures, um, but now I've accepted that that's the case. It's much more complicated for the brain to organize every cell, every nerve, and every cell in the body to do this than it is to think. I'm going to have lunch after I finish this call with Patrick. So
Right.
um, that's a layman's explanation rather than a scientific one. But what happens there, I believe, is that by doing that, we're exercising the neurons. which keeps our mind healthy for everything else that we do as well.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, the trend that I've noticed in the literature on exercise in particular is that essentially, so long as you're doing it in a moderate way, the way that kind of suits your body and your needs, consult a physician, yada yada. But
Yeah.
the way that you're designed to move, the more active you are, generally speaking, your brain functions more effectively. There's better oxygen consumption. There's better kind of growth of brain-derived neurotrophic factor. All these things like fertilizer for neurons. So there's definitely a utility to movement that most people are ignoring in many cultures nowadays, with the desk jobs and the tech jobs and the move your thumbs jobs only. It's definitely a different culture.
And where I think what I'm doing differs, and this is not me, this is the whole practice of movement-based therapies or somatic movement practices, is that I feel, and I think most of the practitioners that I share this work with feel that accessing emotion through movement or as a result of movement goes so more deep in the psyche than trying to figure those same things out verbally or in the mind.
Right.
I believe that it's easier for us to control or interpret what we might be feeling emotionally, control it, deny it, etc. All of those other therapeutic traps. I feel that from my experience so far, that we get somewhere deeper or different through accessing emotions through movement.
Sure.
So that's one of the reasons I think this practice stands out.
Absolutely, and I think if you read, modern kind of body mind integrationist therapists, people like the Peter Levines of the world and the Bessel van der Kolks of the world, there's a strong push for having a more somatically driven understanding of mental health and kind of emotional. I mean, Peter Levine's Waking the Tiger is all about like trauma trapped in the body and the nervous system and stuff like that. And even though there's not a lot of very super solid evidence for that. That's not the most professional way of saying it, but the gist is that it's a very trendy, catchy theory that has minimal, really good evidence and some sort of good evidence. Yeah. So it's very sexy and it's very appealing now because we are noticing that a lot of people are struggling with emotions trapped physically, and that's why somatic therapy is included in a lot of these fancy treatment centers all over the US.
Yes. Yeah, I used Peter's book as an inspiration for an activity in one of my classes, which I'd be happy to share with you. So I break down my workshops and classes into body part areas.
Okay.
And one of the sessions is legs and feet. And in the studying that I did in the Tamalpa Life Art process, which I practice, the legs and feet have a lot of meaning, both in terms of their physicality, in terms of their metaphors. So taking a stand, walking through life, where am I going? All of these kinds of things are the activities and metaphors of the feet and legs.
Yeah.
And then what I've done for the male-oriented process is I've said, well, again, this is evolutionary. This is long-term. This isn't necessarily how we live today. But over that period of time, the evolution of man and women has been that the women have been occupied with childbearing, child rearing. And during that time, the men go out, hunt, build, chase, defend, do all the things that they do in that same equivalent of time. And so men's bodies adapted over through evolution to be more adapted to those activities. And one of those activities involved running. And so I take the men in the class on those days through running activities. And one of the things we do is we role model predator and prey. And so we pair up into physically similar men with physically similar bodies or capacities, and I use a very large room for this, and one person runs and the other person chases them as if they have to eat them. That's their dinner for the day. And we role play this to be as realistic as possible without injury.
Yeah.
And the idea is that the person being chased needs to feel, to get into that place where they feel like they're being chased, really, for their lives. And the person who's chasing is going after their dinner. And if they don't get that person, they're not going to eat. And that enters them through that fact that they are actually running as fast as they possibly can. And so instead of just intellectualizing it, they're experiencing that physically in their bodies. And then when we get to the other end of the room and they've just managed to escape being eaten and killed and eaten, they have to shake off the trauma, as per Peter Levine's story about the gazelles in the African savannah, escaping the tiger and going to a safe space and releasing their trauma through, because that's a key anecdote in his book, is how animals, their nervous systems are still adapted to rid themselves of trauma through their bodies.
Right. It's almost as if the shaking kind of, makes it so that that energy is all cut off. It like sends a signal to the brain to calm down again.
Yeah. Instead of sitting there thinking, oh, I've escaped the tiger, I've escaped the tiger, I've escaped the tiger, which is what we as evolved humans do. The animals let their bodies rid themselves of that experience. And so I go through that exercise with the men, and we repeat it several times, and we change roles so that each one gets. And then we end up chasing each other around the room for fun, and it turns into a dance. But the point there being that I'm building an activity where the body is experiencing that chase as a predator or as a prey, rather than it simply being thought about. And these kind of activities have different outcomes. It connects men to their physical selves, which I believe helps them access other components of their psyche that wouldn't normally be accessible. And that's why I find it exciting.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's definitely on the far end of the spectrum in terms of capable for being exciting in terms of psychotherapy, because your standard talk therapy that I do has very, very low peaks and valleys, basically speaking. So I think
and when I say something like that, like I've done 7 years of talk therapy and I'm still doing it. So there's not a better or worse. I think they both access and have wonderful results.
Oh, sure. I'm not denigrating traditional talk or behavioral psychotherapy. I'm just pointing out that, logically speaking, that's going to be the most exciting thing I think you could do to unleash emotions, except for maybe play sports or something like that.
Yeah.
And
I think sorry to interrupt, but I think that's why men are still attracted in large numbers and in large proportions to certain sports.
Sure.
Because they may not be aware that they're releasing things through those activities. They're not coming to the end of a football match or a boxing match and saying, oh, I've released something and I'm connected to this or that, because they're not in that space mentally and emotionally. But I do think that there's a positive relationship between that, the need of men to experience those activities and the outcomes of that. And there are studies, again, I can't quote them, there are studies that your mental health is better when you exercise, in any form. And I think the most powerful, in the case of men, the most powerful, the better, would be my conclusion.
Okay. And I think that's maybe where we can kind of go back to those 3 points from earlier, the power, the aggression, and all that. So I'm curious, in today's kind of more modern society with the cultural values of, it seems like men are dangerous would be the theme that I hear. Not that I necessarily believe that most people think that, but I think if you pay attention to the online world and the media world, that's the picture that's being painted. It seems like that is kind of a big deal for males nowadays in Western countries. So I find myself wondering, what's that like for you dealing with the men that you deal with? Do they come in feeling trapped? Do they come in feeling like they're bad for wanting to be powerful of some sort,
I can honestly say that I've never had anyone express that.
Okay.
But I do have I have made the conclusion, and I do have the view that most of them are afraid of their bodies.
Sure.
And that's an observation of their behavior and the way that they interact and live, as opposed to them writing on a feedback form, Stephen, I'm afraid of my body. I think that's partly reinforcement from societal messaging.
Okay.
But I also believe that there is a part of us which is dangerous as men. I mean, probably all people, not just men, but I think with men it's closer to the surface. And so there's been this socialization that we have to control and keep that inside and deny it. And I think this is super dangerous. I think that if, again, I'm not a trained psychologist, but to that extent, but I believe that the more that we keep things inside of ourselves, whatever that thing is, but power and excitement as two examples, I think that those things go into shadow. Those things go into the inner psyche. And so when you're continually telling men, you're horrible, you're toxic, and you have to stop doing that, you have to control it, I think anything in life that we try to contain gets under worse and worse pressure.
Yeah.
And becomes a dark force, if not allowed some form of expression. So my strong belief is that telling men that they're awful, that they're toxic, that they are this or that, and they have to stop doing it. And I don't want to go down a Me Too discussion, because I think that's, of course, valuable for us to have that happen. But I think also the negativity placed on men about just being horrible creatures. We're designed as horrible creatures, and we have to control that horribleness without an outlet, I think is going to be really dangerous for the future.
And it's also completely unrealistic, simply because all humans are capable of horrific, gross, primitive-based things. We also are capable of very simple and wonderful things like compassion and cooperation. So the end of the story is not just, men or even aggressive females or some version of like troglodyte that are only going to be destructive. Like, we have all sorts of instincts that are neutral and positive too.
Yeah, one of the things that really worries me about this is boys, the messages that they're getting throughout their lives.
Sure.
And I love using the example. I said I volunteer at a school 2 days a week as a PE teacher, and I see over and over again the boys taking whatever material they have, and a good example is they build what's called a castle with 6 hula hoops. And the boys invariably, the moment they build them, want to knock them over.
Sure.
And that's interpreted by 90% of the population, particularly school teachers, as being, don't do that. That's bad. You're destroying something. And I had that same response initially, but now, having done the research and study and the practical work that I've done, I don't see that as I want to destroy something. I see that as I want to make my body have an impact on the world. I want to have agency. I want to feel force with my body, and that happens to result in the destruction of that castle.
Okay, so in psychoanalytic terms, it's just mastery. I have mastery over my body.
Yeah, mastery with an outcome.
Yeah.
Mastery with an outcome, yes.
Yeah.
And so I think if we tell the boy, don't destroy the castle, you're saying, don't have mastery, over the force and outcome of your body. And then I think that goes inward, and then we're building problems. So what I would like to say in that same case is maybe find an activity where the boys have the possibility of using their bodies in a way, which doesn't necessarily, certainly doesn't mean pushing someone else, which would be the extreme.
Yeah.
But have a physical activity, the mastery that you're talking about, to have an outcome of impact, to have agency with their bodies.
Right.
And I think that's where some of them naturally go in sport at those ages.
Right.
But instead of saying, no, don't do that, say, do this. And celebrate the fact that they want to use their bodies that way, and find healthy outcomes for it, rather than saying don't do that with your body.
And to me, that seems like the perfect argument for sports. If it seems like it's the most pro-social way of competing, and being physical and even being aggressive to a degree. And I think we could debate about to what degree should we encourage aggressive behavior and in what form. But it seems like the most pro-social thing we've come up with for hundreds of years, as a means of not destroying each other.
Yeah, I agree.
Right.
I mean, I haven't thought about it in that context, but I agree. I think my only, I wouldn't call it criticism, my only commentary about sport is that a lot of this is done passively, so there's not an awareness of what we're talking about. It becomes enjoyable or competitive, or I want to win, rather than I'm aware that I need to use my body this way. And I think adding that little element would be really, really useful.
So imagine if, school teachers, PE teachers were kind of having this basically mindful attitude that there's something that you're intending to do here. Let's be intentional about our movement. There's something naturally aggressive about us, to whatever degree, like personality-wise, you might be more aggressive or not, all that stuff. And let's do this intentionally so that we can actually get things out.
Yes.
And having that conversation before every gym class.
Yeah. Because what I see in the school is that even in sports, some of those responses are looked down on, and they need to be for safety reasons. But like, there's nowhere in a public school in San Francisco, I should say. I'm in a bubble myself, so I don't know how these things necessarily are happening in other places. But there would be no way that in San Francisco there would be a boxing or a martial arts class, for example. And I think in certain contexts now, I've taken 3 years of cardio boxing. I think in certain contexts, something which in the past, or a lot of people would consider to be a very negative way to address those physical impulses. It could be a really positive, healthy way to do that in the right context. But I don't think that, because that would automatically be interpreted as an aggression between, you're encouraging aggression between people. I don't think that necessarily has to be the case.
Yeah, that line right there seems so, I can't help but say anything but individualized, right? I can't imagine being able to have a broader metric or framework that could really accurately capture each individual's need for, let's say, self-expression through physically active or even aggressive means, to feel powerful. Because I think what you said earlier is that really this is about power, and one way that power is used is aggressively. There's ways to use power productively. There's ways to use power destructively, right?
Yeah, and I'd like to underline that when I use the word power, I don't mean a hierarchical power. That's a power over others. What I mean is the fact that our bodies can produce a certain amount of force, and that force is felt as a powerful expression of ourselves. I just want to underline that I'm talking about the force of the body, the physical
Yeah.
force of the body through using, is what I mean by power when I employ the word.
Okay. Yeah. And that makes sense to me because I can't imagine a movement like this, a therapeutic movement like this, being for purely aggressive or oppressive purposes.
No, no,
So
not at all, not at all.
I'm sure it could be labeled that way, but that's clearly not the
Well,
intention.
I think these things are related. You know, power as expressed through the body could be, I'm thinking off the cuff here because I haven't thought of this point before, but power used through the body could be a metaphor for the need for hierarchical power. And if we expressed power through our body, we may not need to be oppressive in other ways. I mean, I don't know. I haven't really looked at it or reflected on that metaphor previously.
Sure, and it'd be a great thing to study, if we
Mm.
could, through just simple observational research and survey research. This would be a good, like a mixed method study where you can
Yeah.
observe and get themes, and then you can also use some measure of anger. You can use some measure of, another construct. Need for oppression. I'm sure there's a measure for that out there somewhere, where we can measure our desire to oppress other people. But like it would be great if we could study that because the theory and the hypothesis you have is very intuitive, and it seems to match up, at least in my biased perception, of what is missing in modern society, which is a more movement active, let go of our primitive instincts focused society. It's only kind of it's there's like the whorehouse for our desire to be powerful and aggressive is the football stadium
Mm-hmm.
or the basketball court,
Mm-hmm.
right? Our need as males in particular, but females too, obviously, um, the need for a physically aggressive, active, or even powerful, I feel like I have a sense of agency, urge, that instinct, that urge, just doesn't seem to have many other outlets now with more desk jobs, more tech jobs, more talk jobs, more sitting marketing, whatever jobs, right? Administrative jobs. All these things keep us stagnant,
Yeah, yeah,
and it's kind of like it's like a whorehouse. You have to pay money for it. You have to go and somewhere special. You have to be with other people who are just as primitive and nasty as
mm,
you. Like it's
mm,
definitely that kind of. I'm probably gonna get lambasted for that comment, but the
mm,
gist is, it's this thing that we have to segment and cordon off and not have in our regular day life. But people
yeah,
don't think twice about the fact that there's a park in the middle of your city for people to go play and be
yeah,
active and have
mm,
soccer matches and baseball. We just kind of write that off as like, not important anymore.
yeah. You've reminded me of an anecdote I've told you previously, which is one of well, the number one client I have is a guy who's come to, with the exception of 1 or 2 weeks he's missed because of his own traveling. For 2 years, I've been doing these workshops and classes, and he's come to every single one, bar
Mm-hmm.
two exceptions, over 2 years. So he's been to maybe 50 classes or workshops, and he's a dentist, and he sits in a chair more or less for 8 hours a day
Yeah.
with his hands and his stuff on his face, and his hands in someone's mouth, and he's got this confined physicality of his body, so he is moving, but minute in the context of our own existences. The dental world is on a scale which they have the microscopes and the cameras and everything is on a scale which is really, really tiny.
Mm-hmm.
So even his movements are relative to this are minuscule.
Yeah.
And he comes around to the class, and he's just flailing around the room for 2 hours. And he absolutely loves it because it gives him that opportunity to get out of this stuck, this confined, this restricted, but which is both seated, which a lot of people, men as well, but people do in work, sit
Mm-hmm.
at a desk or
Mm-hmm.
at a place, but
Mm-hmm.
also this confinedness that he would have a focus. And he's just flailing around the room for 2 hours. And we've talked about this before. He specifically likes the naked class because I do classes which are clothed and classes which are naked, because it gives him that total liberation of sensing his entire body moving, which when wearing clothing, we're keeping layers of protection and we're preventing most of our body from sensing simply the air moving around it as we move through the room. So he goes from that contrast of the dental world to dancing around the room naked as a way to get out of his day-to-day life.
So he feels very confined and constrained, so he kind of lets loose more, you would say.
Yeah.
Wow. And if you don't mind just going over a little bit of the philosophy underlying the naked classes, because I'm sure that probably sticks out to some people and they would have some questions about the logic.
It sticks out. That's a good comment.
So to speak.
Yeah, and I have all sorts of reactions to the naked classes. I've had men who don't come to any classes because they've seen that some of them are naked and that scares the hell out of them, and so they're just avoiding the whole thing. My philosophy around the naked classes is very personal in that I'm a naturist in life, and so when I can do something with my clothes off, I do so because I feel a sense of freedom of obviously the body being exposed, but I love the sun on my body, etc. So that's a very personal thing. And so when I started these classes, it was one of the versions that I wanted to do because I wanted myself and other men to be able to explore dancing without the constriction of clothing.
Sure.
So that was my first intention. What I've learned through offering the classes is that it adds a layer, well, it takes off layers, but it adds a layer of vulnerability. We are closer to our true selves, I would say, without the personality of clothing. So clothing, like cars and houses and everything else we own, is a way for us to signal who we are.
Yeah.
And I also believe clothing, I have a really strong views about the choice of clothing. It's like common right now, or has been for the last 20 or 30 years in America particularly, is to have, we talked about sports, is to have baggy stuff and lots of different layers. Like if you see a lot of men in the gym, they'll have some kind of leggings on, and then they'll have 2 or 3 layers of shorts on top of their underwear. And I think these are all signals about how people feel about their bodies. So the more layers and the more I cover, the more shame I have about myself. This is my own view. And so taking off the clothing takes away some of the identity, and it also helps peel away shame, I feel.
Interesting.
I think physiologically in the class, it's a different experience because, as I said earlier, just simply that moving through any space with clothing or without, the skin has a reaction to the air passing over it or to the heat, or there might be the sun shining in the room of the class one day. And so there's a whole physiological experience which is different when we have clothing or not clothing. Yeah. As males having our penis and testicles free and flopping around during this adds a different experience to having them confined when we're moving.
Sure.
And some men are uncomfortable with that, but I think I think it actually accentuates that I have those things and I feel them. I'm flopping my hand. I feel them moving, and that connects me to something that's usually controlled and hidden and doesn't have a sensation of movement. It might only have that sensation when I'm urinating or having sex. And so here I am feeling these parts of my bodies being present in my awareness rather than being hidden away.
Mm.
And then the last element, maybe not the last, but the last one I'll talk about right now is that you're doing that socially. So you're moving through this space, feeling those sensations with other men in the same situation, and they're able to see each other doing that. And so any kind of social nudity is very complex.
Yeah.
Again, I think it takes away layers of defenses and adds to vulnerability. How do I compare? There's a whole bunch of being men. It's competitive and comparing naturally. I'd like to underline, because I didn't say it at the beginning, this is not an erotic class. So this is not a sexual. This is not about sex. And I have men sign release forms and agree to terms and things like that, which says you're not gonna use this as an opportunity for any kind of sexual desire or sexual expression. I do think, and naturally there is an overlap between nudity and sexuality, but I have to have a strong line in the sand there so that everyone feels comfortable in that circumstance without the idea that it might turn. There are, I think we talked about this once before as well, there are classes where men and women can go to that are naked activities that end up in sex, and that's the whole point of the activity. And so in this case, I'm underlining, particularly given it's a therapeutic process, that there is a line there, so that everyone feels comfortable
Right.
in being naked in that space.
And the goal is, again, it's more focused on bodily awareness, being able to be vulnerable while nude, and whatever it means to kind of be in that hierarchy, compare, whatever it is,
Yeah.
less about anything sexual, because that's, as you're saying, that's a very different set of motives and instincts, right?
Yeah, and one of the, I mentioned that I break up the classes and workshops into different parts of the body, and one of the parts of the body that gets a focus is the pelvis and the contents and the use of the pelvis in life, and sex is one of the topics of that class. Reproduction, both pleasurable sex and reproductive sex are part of the content of that class, and we role model some of the body physiological movements involved in sex in that class. And so there is a sexual topic, but it is not about it being turning into sex. That's
Sure.
There's a strong line there.
Yeah.
And there was one other thing that just came to my mind, which was really important about the naked class, which is now gone, but I hope it will return. It was really important.
Well, when it comes back, you let me know.
Okay.
I have, I think, one rebuttal to the earlier point you made about shame and vulnerability with wearing clothing. I perfectly agree that we definitely have clothing for all sorts of covering our shame reasons. No doubt about that.
Yeah.
Back to the point about some of the gym clothing. So the yoga pants phenomenon and the tight leggings and things like that. I actually think that there's a movement, probably an unconscious, not intentional movement nowadays by both companies and the people who are wearing them, where they actually do get to be even more sexual and be even more, let's say, revealing with these very tight yoga pants and these very tight tops and all these things. Actually, I think the compression wear stuff, I actually think that the goal is to kind of like be sexual, have your cake and eat it too. Essentially, like get away with it, but not necessarily break the societal rule of being naked, which you could say is a shame thing, because maybe we should just be naked. But regardless, I think that it's not all that the constriction is for the sake of shame. I also think the constriction nowadays, in the last, let's say, 10 years, when this yoga pants thing has become a big deal, I would say that it's definitely for the purposes of showing off your moneymaker.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with that.
So I think it's a double-edged sword.
Yeah,
it shows off, but it doesn't. But otherwise, yeah, of course, we. I can't imagine, a Fortune 500 company in their boardroom naked. Like, that would be a hilarious idea to me. I would love to see that. Bill Gates naked with The
Steve Jobs.
shareholders.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. There's a picture.
Um, yeah, so I remembered the other point too, because
Okay.
you prompted it in your comment. So the other part of the nakedness, which so the naked activities are less than, I'd say, a quarter of the classes and workshops I run. So it's not the focus of what I do.
Sure.
But underlying what's the focus of what I do is to get men in touch with their primal selves. And there's a whole another paragraph or discussion on the primal self that I'd love for us to talk about. But I think that by taking clothes off, we step back closer to that primal self.
Sure.
Because as I read this week, I knew this, but I hadn't seen it written so articulately, that humans are the only species that clothe themselves. And nobody else, none of the other species go around thinking, "Oh, I'm naked," or "I should be covering myself up." And so I try really hard in my work to get men in touch with their animalistic and primal selves. And so the naked class is one way. It's not the only way. It's one way to step back into those other selves.
Sure, and I guess the off-the-cuff idea in my head would be humans have been the first species to be able to adapt to different climates on a readily quick pace, I guess would be the best way of saying it. So maybe clothing was somewhat a necessity when we started moving more northward. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm not saying we shouldn't wear clothing. I wear them and I enjoy it, but for the purposes of this, getting in touch with the agency, power, and excitement of the male body, I think. I think we could all benefit from the connection to the animalistic and the primal, in male or female, because I think there's more connection to the instinctual part of ourselves by connecting to the animalistic and the primal.
Sure.
What's underlying a lot of our actions and choices, in my view, is simple things like safety and food, and those needs that we project other things onto those needs and explain them. I feel that it could be interesting if we acknowledge the primal in our lives and saw that a lot of the choices that we make are happening on a much deeper, basic level about survival.
So I hear somewhat of a dichotomy that we've kind of, as a society, moved more towards the safety, security, protection side of our instinctual process, and we've let go of some of the primitive, aggressive, power-driven side of our process. And maybe just and again, right now we need to be talking to an evolutionary biologist, an anthropologist, an ethologist, sociologist. I mean, there should be a table of people here, because
How exciting!
I mean, the concepts that you're talking about involve all these very different but related disciplines that speak to how human beings are, quote unquote, designed to function, right? And I think if you look at, as society has modernized since the Renaissance in the 1600s and all that, it seems like the shift has gone from more aggressive, more primitive, more agency focused to more protectionist, more cooperative, more all this stuff kind of side of the spectrum, because maybe we've been spending the last 350,000 years fighting too much, right? And we're kind of swinging back to that side of the pendulum, and you're proposing that we go back to the more primitive side of the pendulum.
Well, be aware of it. Be aware of how it's influencing our actions,
and give it more space to breathe, because modern society doesn't have as much space for it. Right.
I'll try to say the same thing. There's an idea that's come into my head. I'll try to say the same thing you've just said in another way, which is maybe twisting it around in another way. Is that I'm totally anti-war. I hate the idea of killing, et cetera, et cetera. But why does it keep happening? It keeps happening because we have an inner need as a species to fight. to enact those things that war represents. And if we acknowledge the primal need for some of those characteristics of war, then we might not have that outcome. That's a big philosophical way of saying that we act out, I believe, in ways that reflect our primal needs, our primal instincts, rather than acknowledging the primal instincts and perhaps using that acknowledgement to satisfy those needs in better, I'm saying better, in other ways.
Yeah. So
I don't know if that's saying the same thing you said by flipping it around, but that's what came to my mind.
no, it's a fair summation of the idea I was putting out there in different words. Yeah. And let me put you on the spot with a question that's impossible to answer, I think. Let me see if I can formulate it myself too. So what I'm thinking in my head is some version of a basic anthropology question. So in your opinion, with your experience, because that's all we can pull from. Let's just say, in your experience, would you argue, because I've been having a debate with a number of people on Twitter about this, like Heather Hayne and others, like, would you argue that the primitive, aggressive, agency-driven, power-driven, etc. side of us is more prevalent or more in charge or needs more space to breathe than the compassionate and cooperative side of us? And I know that's dichotomous thinking, and I know that there are shades of gray, they mix with each other. Just for the purposes of a more simplistic conversation, because I don't think we would have time to actually really get into it, and I don't think I know enough to really articulate anything well, but I'm thinking, in your opinion, would you agree or disagree with the idea that there's a more impulsive, primitive, aggressive side of us that needs more space compared to the cooperative and compassionate? No.
I
Okay.
disagree. No,
Okay.
I disagree. What yeah, well, I mean, and thank you for helping me clarify that to your listeners, in the sense that I'm here to talk about something that I'd like to help men do and explore, but I don't think that's 100% of what men or humans are. No, absolutely not. I think that we have to have space for both of them. And I'm not going to say 50-50, but what my sensation is about life in general, current culture, particularly in this country and in my bubble, is that we're only supposed to be compassionate, and we're only supposed to be these things. And all of these other things are bad. And we have to stuff them inside ourselves and pretend they're not there. And so all I'm proposing is that we have to make space for those things, because if we don't make space for those things in a healthy way, they go dark and unhealthy. No way at any time am I saying that that's more important or greater importance than the other stuff.
See, I think that's
absolutely not.
That might be our first point of disagreement in this hour-long talk, because I don't know, and maybe I'm being misled by what I'm reading and what I'm hearing. It just seems to me, and maybe it's just because society has been so cooperative, so compassionate, so protectionist, so anti for the last 150 years or so, that maybe we're seeing a backlash and an explosion of these urges, which might be misleading me to think that we are more aggressive and primitive than we'd like to think we are, because that's the position I've been taking, at least for the last 5 or 6 years, is that maybe we are more aggressive on average. Maybe we do have a desire to be nasty. Maybe the kumbaya picture we've been telling ourselves, that we're cooperative and loving and compassionate, is actually a falsehood. Maybe there's on average more negative than, like, 51% negative, 49% compassionate.
No, Patrick, I think we agree. I agree. I agree with you that we are denying the reality of ourselves. Yes. Okay. And I think Jordan Peterson is a great place to hear that.
Sure.
Pay attention to who we really are. And so I agree with you. But whether that's 60-40, 50-50, 40-60, I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know. I think we're agreeing, because all I'm saying is that I agree with you. We've said we're not this thing. And if we are this thing, then we have to pretend it's not there or control it into ourselves, into shadow.
Yeah.
And then it explodes.
Yeah.
In all these ways we see it explode.
Yeah.
Are we more that than we are compassionate? I don't get that impression. I would simply say that my entire life growing up with a feminist mother and considering myself a feminist and benefiting from that as a gay man and having my the ability to live my life as a result of feminism in a different way. I've supported all of that, but I've heard now for 55 years that all of the things that I am are wrong or bad, and I don't think that's true. I think those things exist and they need to have healthy ways to exist, or that's when the bad things happen. But I guess I don't have a position if it's 40% compassion and 60% aggression, or just taking that specific limited scale, or if it's 40% aggression, 60% where that line is. I think it all exists. The aggression exists. I think we agree. The aggression exists more than we like to think it does.
Totally agree.
And we try to control it, and the controlling leads to negative outcomes. That's how I'd put it. Yeah, I think we agree, without stating figures.
Right on. Okay.
And can I tell an anecdote that we talked about once before that?
Sure.
I think it probably talks about the other half of this, because we've focused mostly on what would largely be called the power, excitement, agency, which a lot of people can interpret as aggression. I don't like to. I think that's the negative way to see those forces in the body, but but it is one of them, one of the ways. Doing this same kind of work where for hours I engage men through very active, high intensity work to express themselves physically, can have both outcomes. It can have, or I guess what I'm trying to say is going through that cycle of bringing the male body to an ecstatic form of expression through movement, physicality, sport, whatever. It comes down into a compassionate place, and I think that's maybe the missing piece of what we've been talking about. Is I ran a one-day workshop in March, which was a day about the pelvis and reproduction and sexuality, and at one point in this day where those themes had not been articulated in words at this point, and so the participants didn't know what the theme of the workshop was at this point, but they had done an hour-long movement exploration. And in that movement exploration, one of the men picked up a big yoga ball that was in the space, and he carried it around on his shoulders. And at the end of the day, after we then did move into the explanation of the meaning of the day being fucking, reproduction, sexual pleasure, and exploring all that for a couple of hours, we got to the end of the day, and the one opportunity he had to speak, and he shared that in that first movement exploration, when he had the yoga ball on his shoulders, that he imagined that he was carrying his son around the room. And this was after having gone through a high intensity activity. And this guy was 60, 62, something like that. And he talked for at least 5 minutes about the emotion of carrying his son around the room and how valuable and important that was, and just really touching response.
Mm.
And then he paused and very dramatically said, "But I don't have a son.
Mm.
In fact, I don't have any children. And I'm in my 60s, and I've never, ever thought about children until today."
Wow.
And not knowing him greatly, but imagining that he's someone who's probably done years of therapy, just having been in a couple of workshops with him, that I would judge that or imagine that he's done other types of therapeutic work. And at 62, he imagined himself having a son,
Sure.
which it was quite clear for him that he was extremely moved and extremely emotional, that it had the movement activity had accessed part of him that he had never accessed before.
Right.
And so I'm telling this long anecdote to underline that these kind of activities, using the body, exploring force, expression, power, agency, excitement, etc., can lead to that compassionate place or that other side of the scale. So he, by experiencing those expressive body, force, etc. activities, he was able to access something that he wouldn't have otherwise been able to access. That's what I view. And if you want to call that compassion, or what I prefer to say, that um, the the body is the language of the emotion, as opposed to words. I think words
Mm.
can get there, but that's
Mm.
more of a controlled, thoughtful process.
Mm.
I do believe that the body um, is the language or the communication system of the emotional psyche. And so he was able to understand that he actually wanted kids for the first time in his life at 60. Um, so
Wow.
um, yeah, so I think we're both, going back to your point. I think we're both. I don't like to use the word aggressive, but in this context, I will. We're aggressive, and that's part of who we are. That's part of our primal instinct, because it's a survival. We have to get food. We have to protect our families. We have to. We see the figure on the hill with the spear, and we have to survive that encounter. And so aggression is a component of surviving.
Mm.
So is
Yeah.
compassion. We couldn't have survived without compassion.
Or cooperation. Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Relating, yeah. And talking to that guy on the hill with a spear rather than killing him. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Well, this has been a really cool conversation. I appreciate you just chatting with me and giving up some time today. Why don't you let everyone know where they can find you and read about you, learn about you, and connect with you if they want to do a class?
Okay. I run the classes and workshops, 3 workshops coming up this fall in San Francisco. I will hopefully be bringing them to other places through traveling in the next couple of years, but right now I'm limited to San Francisco. My website is www.ape, A-P-E, like ape, man, dot men, M-E-N. Men is a top-level domain, believe it or not, so there's no com or co or anything like that. www.ape.men. That's where they can
Okay,
find me.
right on. And are you on social media anywhere? Should we kind of out you there or no?
I'm on Twitter, but I'm not super active.
Okay.
So my I I mean I'm happy for people to follow me. I'm corporeal male. Um, C O
Or
Corporeal male. And I use that more for the performance work that I do, but I obviously welcome any followers there.
great. And then one last final thought. Anything that you think we didn't cover or something you want to reiterate that's very important in your mind about what you do and what you believe?
Well, I think I would love to just briefly talk about one of the ways that, because I think it's just really exciting and I think it's undervalued in society, and it's particularly male. So one of the classes I run is about the sperm being the single cell organism which we create in our bodies. We create 100 million of them a day, and they take 130 days to reach maturity. So that means if you multiply 130 by 130 million, you've got billions and trillions of sperm being produced in our body at any time, compared to a female body which produces 1 egg a month. So if you compare those and those metaphors between types of bodies, and the fact that sperm swim at 1.5 times their length every second, they can do that for 5 days without stopping. They're ejaculated from the body at 11 miles per hour. They compete against each other to reach their target destination. All of these things, and I'm just touching on a few of the characteristics of sperm, are metaphors for who men are. So we talked about aggression in the sport and everything else, but our bodies are constantly producing this creature who is capable of all of those different things. And I think all of those things are metaphors for the identity of men, and the competitiveness, the speed, the force, the power, the endurance. That word hasn't come up yet in this call, but endurance. These are all things that I'd love us to embrace as being all positive. Competitiveness is good. It's how we reproduce, and it's one of the characteristics of life. And so in one of my classes, workshops is dedicated to the sperm, and we lie down on the floor and we replicate the sperm movement by flapping our legs around, and we try to crawl across the floor so that we physically sense in our bodies what it's like to be a sperm. And I just love talking about that. Again, men react initially like, oh, that's sexual, or oh, that's something we're not supposed to talk about, or that's shameful or dirty, and we have to wipe it away. And I think that it's a really exciting way to think about who we are physically, and the body representing the psyche and the psychology of the individual. So that's just another little window into how I approach the work.
Wow, very neat metaphor. Would not have thought of it myself, for sure. Interesting. Okay. Well, it is awesome talking to you, and I really appreciate your time and your candor, and even all the secrets you give away about what you do. I mean, it's exciting stuff, and I can't imagine another comparable program that exists in this country, maybe even in the world. I have no clue. So that's very unique what you do, and I think it's very helpful so that we can have a more kind of pro-social society, for sure.
Good, thank you.
Absolutely.
And it's been a thrill to talk to you. We've been planning this for some time, but there are very few people out in the well, I call it the male universe of thought, who I respect and agree with more than Patrick. So,
oh, well, thank you.
Thank you for inviting me to talk to you.
Of course, no problem, and maybe we can chat again in the near future.
Would love that.
Okay, great. So www.ape.men, is that right?
That's right.
All right. So Stephen Horner, thank you so much, and we will talk hopefully soon.
Thank you, Patrick. Bye-bye.
All right, bye.